Hi, welcome back. Ann Kramer here at I Am Life Puzzle. And today, what we're going to work on is what I call the feeling, thinking flow and the roots for addictive behavior choices. And this is a really important segment that I teach clients to understand that as young children, we have to learn how to feel and think. Remember, we talked about how we were forming the emotional edge and the thinking edge and forming a self. Well, human children have to learn how to feel and think, and the experiences of their life is what's going to teach them to do that. And what I've found over the course of working with so many clients is that for many people during the journey of their childhood, the way they learn to feel and think kind of gets stuck, and they get stuck in patterns that result in them using addictive behaviors to kind of compensate for that. So what we're going to look at today is how that process happens, how our brain forms, how we get stuck in patterns, and how to get out of that. Okay, so we have kind of a four-part brain is what I try to teach people. That we have a reptilian brain, which is kind of that automatic reflex brain. Like if I passed out on the floor right now, my reptilian brain would take over and it would tell me to breathe to keep me alive. And that's what the reptilian brain is all about, is how do we keep the body alive in an emergency. We don't use that brain very often because we're not under constant chaos and threats, but it's there when needed. The more important brain are the next two, the mammalian and the neocortex. The mammalian portion of our brain is what I call our sensing brain. We see, touch, hear, taste, smell, everything. And incoming through our senses is lots of data. And once that data comes into our sphere, then we're going to make a decision very quickly. Is this painful or pleasurable? Okay, so all incoming data through our senses, where body is always responding to it and asking, is this painful or pleasurable? For example, if I stuck a bottle of ammonia under your nose right now, right? You smelled ammonia, you'd probably back up because that smell is painful. On the flip side, if I stuck a bottle of perfume under your nose, that would be pleasurable, most likely, and that you might even consider buying a bottle of that perfume. So pain and pleasure is what our mammalian brain is always checking in on. What's happening? Is it pain or pleasure? The second the mammalian brain determines if something is pain or pleasure, then your neocortex, this portion up here, is going to say, okay, what do we want to do? What's the logic response to something that we now know is painful or pleasurable? And so, right, with the ammonia, you back up. With the perfume smell, you might buy it. Those are all the choices we're going to start learning how to make. And then those two parts of our brain, the mammalian and the neocortex, they're dancing constantly together. So the strength of how your emotional, your sensing brain knows how to manage and determine something pain, pleasure, is equally coordinated with your neocortex, your logic, and what should we do. But again, go back to childhood. 2 and 3 year olds don't always know. And so that's where some of the things can start to kind of get a little confused, and these edges don't get formed during our childhood, and our self gets a little off kilter by the time we're walking into adulthood. The fourth part of our brain is what I call the intuitive brain. And this appears to be a skill set that humans are now developing as our brains evolve over the last 40,000 years. Our brains have been getting more and more developed. And so the intuitive brain, where people know things without having any data, seems to be a real portion of our brain. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because for most of us, the mammalian neocortex has gotten so clogged up or so confused that that's where we're going to spend our time in this feeling, thinking flow. So what I try to get people to understand is that if you think about incoming information like water coming through a pipe, right? Incoming information will come into your brain. It'll flow through your feeling filter first. We feel first, we think second. The feeling filter is going to decide is this painful or pleasurable, and then it's going to flow into your thinking filter, where you'll make a logical choice about what to do about whatever's coming in. Seems simple enough, easy enough. We should all be able to do that all day, every day, right? Well, we have this little thing called childhood. And so in childhood, a lot of incoming information is coming in. But the reality is, children don't always know if something is painful or pleasurable. And so what happens in our childhood is things start to clog up a little bit. And the flow isn't as easygoing as that first picture that I showed you. And sometimes it begins to back up because incoming information will come in, and a young child might not know, is this painful? Is this pleasurable? And then what should I do? The example I often give is a jack in the box. If you put a 2-year-old in front of a Jack in the Box, right, and you're going to play the music, dun 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 dun, dun, and then out of nowhere pops up this clown, painful or pleasurable to a 2-year-old? Well, for you and I, it's pleasurable, right? We know what it is. We understand how Jack in the Boxes work. But for a 2-year-old, this little pretty box with this nice music, and then out of nowhere comes this clown. It's a surprise. They don't know, painful or pleasurable. Well, for a lot of 2-year-olds, they're going to cry. It's painful for them. They're not sure what to do with it, so they cry. Now, we feel bad about that, right? And we're going to rush in and kind of talk to them. No, 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 it's okay, honey. It's not painful. We'll put the top down, we'll do it again. And then when that little click comes and the um, uh, clown's going to come out, what are we going to do? We're going to smile at the child. We're going to say, pleasurable, pleasurable. It's all okay. And the baby will go, oh, okay. I thought it was pain. Now I see it's pleasurable. I guess I'll laugh after all. Well, that's reframing. And we do that a lot with children when they take in information that don't quite know what to do and they'll make a poor choice, right? We'll show them, oh, look, here's what it is. But a lot of times children will have experiences that we don't know that they've misinterpreted the pain pleasure and they've made a choice about it and they get stuck. And so we don't know to go back and reframe it for them. And so that carries on inside them and they continue to have an attachment to a pain fear instead of a pleasure joy of something. And what ends up happening for a lot of children is that pain, that flow gets backed up completely, that they begin to see the world because it's so overwhelming to them. And perhaps they don't have a support system, or they do have a support system, but some things are happening that the support system doesn't know has happened. They don't know how to help them reframe it. And so this literally gets clogged up and a child begins to see the world through mainly pain, fear, and occasionally pleasure, joy. And that's how they begin to approach the world. They see it that way. It's out to get me all the time. And occasionally it doesn't. And when you have that blocked flow, your logic says if the world is mainly painful, then let's be on guard. Let's be stepping back from and be ready to be hurt. And when that happens, this pipe is backed up. And what happens is children need to find a way to release that, right? Or humans need to find a way to release that. And the way we do that is we attack ourselves or we attack others. And that's a temporary way of sort of letting out this frustration, this backed up pipe, taking the pressure off temporarily. And so when we take it out on others, we might become bullies, we might attack folks, we might become a criminal and say, hey, I'm a victim here. Everybody's out to hurt me. I'm going to hurt others. And we just get in the habit of taking out our frustrations on others. More so, though, we tend to take it out on ourselves. And we go deep inside ourselves and we might have anxiety and depression and just get locked into this thought pattern that's not really healthy. Or even more so, we move into what I call addictive behaviors. We go, when we need to let some pressure off, we go to a place where the rest of the world disappears while we're doing this temporary behavior or this addictive behavior. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be video games, right? Whatever we choose as the addictive behavior, the goal is to take pressure off and relieve ourselves from the pain, fear that we can't seem to think that we can manage. And so we go there, and all addictive behaviors provide one thing. They temporarily remove us from the pain, fear that we don't feel that we can manage. The problem with addictive behaviors, whether it's drugs, alcohol, video games, food, whatever, is it only works temporarily. And as soon as we stop doing that behavior, the world comes rushing back in and the pain, fear comes back and we start the pattern all over again. And what I do is I call this the demolition derby pattern. So our feelings and our thinking are crashing into each other over and over and over again. And what I'm trying to teach you in this process is to understand how when you get clogged and you get backed up and you get into this demolition derby pattern, there's a way to get back out of it, okay? Where you come back to run a healthy race, where you learn to manage pain, fear, pleasure, joy again. And you make proactive conscious choices and you get out of this blocked flow. And you begin to understand that your addictive behaviors are just choices you made. And the thing that we know about addictions is that 85% of addictions start in childhood. And they start why? Because we have this backed up flow, because we're children and we don't know what to do. And so we get stuck in these patterns before we even realize what's happening. Well, if that's been going on for you, I want you to know there's a way back out. And what we need to do is begin opening up that flow again. And we do that first by understanding I am stuck. I'm in a pattern of addictive thinking and behavior uses that don't really work for me. And I want to get out of that now. And that's the first step. Once you know that, then it's time to open this flow and just forgiving yourself and then getting back into healthy feeling, thinking flow. And once you understand that, you can do anything. And the reality that we have to come back to is while a child oftentimes gets stuck in thinking that it's 80-20, 80% of the time it's pain, fear, 20% of the time it's pleasure, joy. When you open the flow again, you realize it's probably 50-50. Pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain. They're both in part of my life. And that's what I try to teach people to understand, that the world is painful and pleasurable, and you can manage both. And that's where the emotional edge and the thinking edge come together when you say the world is painful and pleasurable and I can manage both. You may have gotten in the habit to avoid pain and fear. And as a result of that, this edge is still open and yourself isn't in charge. The feeling thinking flow, this session that I'm trying to teach you is to say, let's interrupt that process. That you can come back to know the world is painful and pleasurable and I can manage both. And if you're stuck in an addictive behavior, you want to seek out a counselor to help you interrupt that process and get out of that demolition derby that I was talking about. And I actually do another session on a demolition derby and how to get out of that pattern thinking that oftentimes just triggers like that. And before you know it, you're back into your addictive behavior, and how to break away and become back into the healthy flow and building your life puzzle again and putting these pieces together in a way that works for you with a healthy boundary, emotional boundary, thinking boundary, and strong self. So that's what the feeling, thinking flow is all about. It's just recognizing that as we learn to feel and think, sometimes we can get into patterns as children that really aren't useful for us in adulthood. And if you're an adult now and recognizing that that's happened, let's interrupt that process and start back on healthy flow and get back to making your life puzzle, a piece at a time with the whole you in mind.